We did.
All right, great.
I'll
All right, we'll do it on camera, actually. Yes, good evening. The Joint Design Review Board meeting of July 7th, 2011 is called to order. We don't have any members in the audience, so they will not need to turn off their cell phones or put on pagers on vibrate, but we ask the board members do so as well. In terms of a roll call, Board Member Ellis.
Present.
Board Member Insua. Board Member Palmer.
Here.
Board Member Simonian.
Present.
Board Member Yu.
Here.
Great, and that concludes Design Review Board number 1. For Design Review Board number 2, Board Member Garagos. Here. Board Member Malikian.
Here.
Board Member Sakai.
Here.
Board Member Zarifian.
Here.
And Board Member Balanian is not present here with us. At this point in time, perhaps we'd like to elect a chair pro tem for this Joint Design Review Board meeting. Any nominations?
I'll move Alan Malikian as chair.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you very much. And at this point, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Laura Stotler, Principal Planner, who will be providing us a presentation for tonight's joint workshop of the Design Review Boards on the study session for the draft North Glendale Community Plan.
Thank you, Velia. Chair Malecki and members of the commission, or board, rather. The North Glendale Community Plan is a project which the Planning Department has been working on for a couple of years. If I can get this, there we go. The community plan area that we're looking at is essentially Montecito Park, Spar Heights area north in the city of Glendale, includes the area within La Crescenta Valley, or within the Crescenta Valley that is within the city of Glendale. We began community outreach on our community plan in spring 2009. Following direction from the council when we had meetings related to some of the development issues that were going on in North Glendale. We met with the homeowners to find out what they wanted to see in the community and what they felt the issues were in North Glendale. We met with community groups, homeowners associations, individual businesses, schools, churches, business groups. In 2009, we put together a report after meeting with the community that identified the issues in the community. And we brought that to the council. And among the issues, we had many issues that we agreed on, but then we had basically 6 different issues that we disagreed on. And council directed us to form an advisory committee to talk about those issues of disagreement. In April of 2010, we came up with recommendations from the advisory committee, met with the community to check those issues out with them, and we went to the city council, and they said go ahead and draft a plan based on the recommendations of the advisory committee. We drafted a preliminary draft in January to May. Those were reviewed again by the advisory committee, and last month, and actually 2 weeks ago, we presented a draft plan, which you have before you tonight, and that's the draft North Glendale Community Plan. And just to talk a little bit about the areas where we had some disagreement. We had 8 meetings. We did walking tours so they get an actual feel for the neighborhood. We walked along Foothill Boulevard. It gives you a different view when you actually walk up and down the street versus driving on it. We also took a walking tour of Spar Heights. And the issues that they discussed in their meetings were Foothill streetscape design and height, on Foothill height being the main issue. They looked at Spar Heights and talked about heights in Spar Heights as well as the uses. They looked at issues of buffering between residential and commercial uses. Of particular importance is the topography in the area, which causes some friction between those uses. And they also looked at transportation needs. In June 2010, Council adopted the advisory committee recommendations, and they directed staff to prepare not only the community plan, but also the necessary tools to implement it. And that would include the comprehensive design guidelines, which you've been given a copy of, zoning alternatives. We have a variety of zoning alternatives, not only in the area, plan area, which you're going to see, but then we also have an alternate zone that we're looking at creating for Foothill. And they also look at general plan amendments to create a community plan. Right now, our general plan does not have any sort of provisions for community plans. So those are really actually minor amendments to the general plan. We had 4 meetings with the advisory committee to talk about the revised draft. And what you're seeing is the result of not only the staff's doing a preliminary draft, But then we revised that preliminary draft based on these 4 meetings and the input that we received from the advisory committee. And the way the plan is organized, it's in 5 different chapters. The first one is an introduction. It says what the purpose of a plan is and why we created it. Chapter 2 is a community vision. It starts with a vision that was actually given to us by the advisory committee. I'll show you that in a minute. Chapter 3 talks about principles, and these will be citywide principles. And then it relates those citywide principles to what's important to the North Glendale community. Chapter 4 is places, and I think of that as the heart of the document. That's where you'll see descriptions of individual neighborhoods, the vision for the future of those neighborhoods, and then guidelines for how to develop those neighborhoods. And then Chapter 5 is a policy framework. How does this plan fit into other community plans? How does it fit into the other policy documents we have, not only in Glendale, but also regional policy as well as state policy? This is the community vision that was written by the advisory committee. And there is a copy in your plan. I won't read it to you here, but it really reflects what is important to that community, and that's what we used as the guide of if we were on track or not when we were coming up with policies and drafting what we heard from the community. This is really what we used as a direction. In terms of principles in Chapter 3, I want to point that out to you because these are citywide principles. They're not really addressed elsewhere in our general plan at this point. We wanted to focus on having a policy, a citywide policy related to managed growth. In it, we talk about maintaining, enhancing, and transforming certain areas of the city. You'll see there's maps associated with that. We look at mobility. We're adding complete streets. Those are requirements of the state law, and it's also good planning. We also looked at adding transit and trail connections. And then we added a section on sustainability and infrastructure. And in it, we talk about infrastructure limits, essentially how high can you build up on the hillsides. Because right now we have basically a de facto urban limit because our infrastructure only serves to a certain elevation. And so in terms of being energy efficient and sustainable, we're not looking at extending the urban limit line further up into the hillside. In fact, if you've been watching the news, you know that the city's purchased a lot of open space over the past 20, 30 years. And so that actually limits the ability to sprawl up to the hills. Instead, we're having a focus more on infill in the existing urban area. And again, those are absolutely consistent with sustainability concepts that are being touted not only at the state level, but also through SCAG, through their Compass Blueprint program. And then Chapter 4, places. Again, this is the heart of the document. We have 7 areas which are identified. Within each of those areas, we have the neighborhoods. It's organized where we have a vision, and then implementing the vision, and then architectural design guidelines identified for each area. And here's the map of the different places we have identified. Again, this actually shows it better in your document. And then Chapter 5, this is what I think of as our legal framework. We talk about our public participation process. Again, it was long. We talked to a lot of different people, and we tried to synthesize all the ideas we heard into this document. We talk about Glendale policies, regional growth policies, and then state and federal laws that we have to comply with. And when it talks to implementing the vision, I think this is key. This is what makes this document different than other ones that we've produced in the past. Not only do we have a policy document, which is the community plan you see, but then we actually have the implementation tools to make it effective immediately upon adoption. We have comprehensive design guidelines. At this point, we're looking for the guidelines that will address the community that we're addressing right here, the North Glendale. But there's actually obviously a potential that those will be expanded. We're looking at zoning alternatives, and then we're also looking at general plan amendments, so it's effective upon adoption. And I'd like to turn it over now to Stephanie, who'll go over the design guidelines.
Good evening, Board 1 and Board 2. You have in your package both the community plan, which within the community plan in Chapter 4, there are 7 areas, as Laura explained, and within those 7 areas, there are design guidelines included in each area. There's a separate document called Comprehensive Design Guidelines. These are essentially principles that we've heard from you over the many years we've been working together, And we've essentially scribed them down. They will be applied to the area in North Glendale. They are a separate document, so there's a potential that they could be someday used citywide in the near future or beyond after we've developed more community plans. We want your feedback on both documents. Of course, we'll be looking for your very detailed feedback on the comprehensive design guidelines and on the design guidelines that are within each area in Chapter 4. So, as you all know and very often have been asking for design guidelines that help provide predictability for the applicants so they know what you're looking for before they come in, before they put pen to paper, for the community so that they can be ensured that their quality of life will be maintained and improved over time. And, obviously we're all interested in good design, having new projects be appropriate to their place and to enhance, all projects to enhance their neighborhoods. The organization is fairly simple, falling within the categories of projects that you typically see. So what we've done with the design guidelines is we've organized them in a format that you're all familiar with. We've broken down the continuum of the design process into site planning, mass and scale, and design detailing, similar to what we do in our staff reports and the way that you're typically looking at projects. And so in each section within Area 4, in Chapter 4 in all the areas 1 through 7, and also within the comprehensive design guidelines within each chapter, we've broken them down within this structure so that there's some level of continuity as to how we look at projects. In the comprehensive design guidelines, I might call your attention to the introduction. That describes the design process as an inherently interrogative process with the questions that you're often asking the applicants. And so it's sort of a guide as to how to frame looking at a project so that the applicants will know what it is you're looking for before they come to you. So these are some statements about what we're looking generally in site planning, mass and scale, design and detailing. In both documents, we've tried to make sure that there is a strong statement that these are not prescriptive guidelines telling people what to do, rather how to think about their project and what might be appropriate, what might be an appropriate approach. The design guidelines are not ever intended to be prescriptive, and there are statements embedded within the documents, if they're not clear enough, please let us know, that really encourage innovative solutions. And even if an innovative solution is not particularly in line with this or that guideline, that will always be recommended and supported by this board, this body, and staff as well. And so here's an example of how we have very unique situations in many of the neighborhoods in North Glendale. And so in the comprehensive design guidelines, we provide a very general approach with an idea that someday they might be applied citywide. Within each area, there are a series of neighborhoods that have some common qualities. That's why we've put them together in one area. And so we've tried to provide a specific direction that addresses the unique qualities of those areas. So for example, in Area 4, which contains woodlands-type neighborhoods, including Whiting Woods, the existing homes are typically have a very horizontal character. They're nestled into a wooded environment, and we wanted to call attention to those qualities because that's very important to someone as they would make an addition to their home or design a new home. So that's how we've structured the documents. Again, we're looking for your feedback on the entire North Glendale Community Plan as well as the design guidelines. There's a lot of material to go through. We understand that. Some of you have been involved in the process itself, have come to the advisory group meetings, and we really appreciate that you've done that. But we've given you an additional 3 weeks, so that we'll be looking for your commentary on July 28th in our next joint meeting.
In addition to the design guidelines, one of the issues that we have identified in the document are zoning alternatives, and I'll go over those. Right now we have 4 identified within the document itself. First one is extending Montrose Shopping Park. Right now we have a CR zone for the Montrose Shopping Park. We're looking at extending it to Orangedale on the north side and through the Trader Joe's site on the south side of Honolulu. In Spar Heights, we heard a lot of concerns over the heights adjacent to single family, so we're looking at the C3 zone. Right now it's height District 1. We're looking at creating a height District 4, and the area that's on Ocean View, that's zone C3 adjacent to single family, we would be creating height zone 4, which would be a 35-foot height limit in that area. No changes to the uses. For Indian Springs, this would be the area north on Verdugo. Right now it's a C21 that has a height district of 35 feet, and we're looking at increasing that to 45 feet. That would be close to the 50-foot height limit that occurs on the south side of Verdugo in this location. And on Foothill Boulevard, we had areas of agreement on Foothill Boulevard. Everybody agreed on the advisory committee that allowed uses should be flexible. They don't want to change existing zoning, and they want to retain existing businesses. They felt buildings should follow topography. This is a preferred photo. This is something that was viewed by the advisory committee, and they felt that development similar to what actually occurs down south. I believe this is La Jolla. This is what their concept is for developing on a hillside. They want to encourage a variety of roof heights. They wanted to have transition between residential and commercial uses. They focused in on landscaping and also retaining walls. And again, just a photo of transitions between commercial and residential uses. This is how we deal with it in the zoning code. And then we have the areas of disagreement. The main disagreement is height. That was what the advisory committee disagreed on, and when we met with the community, they reflected the same concerns. We had a large number on the advisory committee who felt 35 feet should be the allowable height. We had a number who felt that the existing 50-foot height limit should remain, and staff came up with a proposal that's actually a combination of 35 feet and 50 feet. And then this is our current code. Goes up to 50 feet. I know you're familiar with the setbacks. Under Alternative A, we would have a 35-foot height limit. We do have some modifications to the setbacks. And Alternative B would be 50 feet, again with also alternatives to the setback. So it's not exactly the same zone as we have right now, but the height would be the same. And then Alternative C, this is what was proposed by staff, a 50-foot high for only 30% of the site at the front half. It depends on the depth of the lot as well as the width for how much square footage a building could have and the height. And this is what the 30% would look like from the street, or could look like from the street. And again, what we're looking at is really a package of separate actions. Each of these items, North Glendale Community Plan, the design guidelines, not only the design guidelines that are embedded in the community plan, but then also the separate comprehensive design guidelines you have for review, the zoning modifications and general plan amendments. Each one is a separate item, and it will be looked at separately. And when it's adopted separately. However, they will be adopted together as a package, if that makes sense. So you'll have a series of items. So next step for a review, we have the informational meetings that we're holding with you. We've held it with the Planning Commission last night, and we're just introducing the documents to help in your review. We'll be going on July 18th to the Parks and Recreation, it's Parks and Recreation Commission. Then we're going to the Historic Preservation Commission on July 25th, and also the Transportation and Parking Commission. from those three commissions, we're looking at recommendations on their specific areas of interest. Then we'll be going back to the joint DRBs on July 28th, and then taking everybody's recommendations to the Planning Commission on August 17th. And we're looking at having, depending on what the Planning Commission does and their recommendations, we're looking at having a plan revisions done sometime in September, and we'll be bringing then a second revision to the City Council in October. And that concludes staff's presentation. And we're available to answer any questions you may have on the organization or any questions you have on the proposals that you had a few days to look at.
Thank you.
Anyone? I have a question. On the setback, that there was some discussion, I guess, or the heights we talked about. Was there a solution that was adopted, or are you going to the council with 3 options and let the council?
Well, at this point, we brought it to the Planning Commission. We brought 3 options to them. As far as the advisory committee goes, we've had no consensus whatsoever on what the height should be. And it looks like we're not going to reach one, at least right now. So we put forth proposals in the hope that we're going to get some feedback.
Has the staff looked at LA County requirements of the same situation?
Yes, we did look at LA County zoning. They have a different process from us, and when they approve projects, they actually have different tools than we do. So we looked at our own process and said, well, how could we
Well, no, in
with
that
zoning,
particular condition, I guess you want to call it. If you're within a certain distance from the residential, you're allowed certain height, and then as you get further away, you get higher, and so it gives more of a skilled transition from the residential to the, I guess, the streetscape. So I think that's, and the reason that I'm saying LA County is that along, and I'm assuming that that particular sketch is predominantly along Foothill. And we're basically sandwiched between LA County on either side. And so keeping it consistent with the LA County would be something that maybe should be looked into, right?
Yeah, we have looked
Okay.
at LA County's design standards. They have a community standards district where they actually have several different districts and different heights within their stretch of Foothill Boulevard.
I see.
And we also looked at City of LA. We met with their planners as well.
No one has any questions. I have another question. Looking at the community plan, and just one quick comment, and I don't know if we should start talking about this or is something that is just general. Under the, I guess the design, overall design and detailing, just have a quick question on that. There's a very broad suggestions or recommendations as far as the overall design, detail, entries, and finish, but then when you start getting into wall thicknesses and stuff, you guys are recommending a specific dimensions that the staff would like to see.
Can you identify
just
where
an
you
example-
are? Are you in the
example-
comprehensive design guidelines document or community
The
plan?
community plan,
Okay.
page 98.
Page 98. Thank you.
And overall, most of the recommendations are very broad, and it can be
Okay, so you're
the
looking,
different
Yeah.
ways, and it allows the architects or designers to be more creative. Whereas when you get down to the wall thicknesses, you're very specific in saying 1 or 2 inches of window recessed.
yeah, what we wanted to, and if we haven't worded it correctly to reflect what we've heard from you in the past, what we state there, I think you're referring to item D, if a traditional architectural design is proposed, exterior walls should be thick enough to provide a window recess. So that's one of the things that we've heard from you. If we got it wrong,
Well, I think
you know.
I think recess is fine. I think it should be more of a, the detail needs to work with the project itself rather than give us specific dimensions. of
Okay,
what-
so you think it should be more general?
That's,
Okay.
I think it will be, it's easier to get a more of a quality design than just give a specific dimension there. So.
That's a good point. We'll go through, as we go through the document, we'll identify places that might call out specific dimensions in that regard and make it a little bit more general for more flexibility.
Probably had one question. I'm just thinking about Foothill Boulevard and that section through there, with the project that we had before us recently that is on my mind. I like some aspects of it where you're saying if the project is over 100 feet long, that there's going to be some kind of movement within the facade to create open space on the sidewalk and whatnot. I think that's good. Is there a way of almost taking it one step further slightly and like you were showing the pictures of La Jolla or some of the other shots you're showing in here where it's you might be taking it too much to one style or another, but you might be something sort of like how you deal with Hillside where there's some height changes in terms of whether you're doing pitch or not, which might give you flexibility and which, again, might encourage another style or another. I think some of the issues that came up on those commercial projects was that just the massiveness of it in an area that, especially on the south side of the street, I mean, in my mind, there really is a difference between the north side of the street and the south side of the street, and I think there should be some acknowledgement of that because the height issues are really much more of a south side of the street, and I think you could really look at the two of those separately in my mind because I think 2 or 3 stories on the north side really isn't a problem, and there's a lot of buildings like that now that are that massive, and I think, and you even showed it on your section because the real trick is how you develop the south side of the street because there isn't that kind of mass on the south side of the street. So as a board member, I want more understanding in terms of, because I think it's going to be critical when we, and again, I don't really have a position either way on it yet, but if you allow a building that's 3 stories of facade, and I think it said in the development standards that you could have your first floor plated 15 feet. That's really massive. And again, I'm not saying I'm just saying it's a big change, and to have people really understand the kind of massiveness that that's going to be. And I think that's what people were looking at when there had been developments on Foothill is that, and again, I'm not trying to keep it all as one story, 10-foot plate line stuff, but that is what's there. And I think there's a view that you have of the mountains and stuff as you're going down Foothill that's a part of the community. And I think that's what the community was tapping into with those developments. So I think the most difficult thing for me is projects that are going to happen on the south side of the street. And I think there ought to be a differentiation between the two in terms of how they're handled.
Well, that's, if I may encourage you to think about what you would like to see in the code. Because one of the things that we understand from the couple of projects on the south side of Foothill that had gone forward through the process and that you saw was that the biggest challenge was that the zoning did not match what the community wanted and frankly what the boards wanted to see. I think one project went to Board 1 and one project went to Board 2, so you're all familiar with the issues. What we have been struggling with the advisory committee is to be able to define a zoning package that would not that would make it a little more predictable, that wouldn't put the pressure on these boards to mold and sculpt a project that was complying with code in the way that you were trying to do with those 2 projects, the 2 that I can think of, where they met all of the code requirements at a 50-foot height limit, but they were still too massive. And so what we have been trying to do, and one of the reasons that we put forward the combination 35-50-foot proposal, one, to reflect that kind of stepping up the hill, as Chair Malekian had mentioned, that's reflected in the county guidelines, but also to make sure that the the community, the applicants, and this board understands basically what massing is preferable. Now, it's always a challenge to basically design the massing of a building in the zoning code, but that's, especially on the south side, that's what we were trying to focus on, and that's why we put forward that proposal. So because you're all intimately familiar with the logistics of what that means on a site that slopes in two directions, what height means in those cases, we're really looking to you to help make comments that would better craft the proposals that we've come up with, or make any other recommendations that you could provide.
Go ahead, Mr. Zerf.
I think, or I feel that I'm going to be facing a little bit of maybe a tough time trying to understand how to evaluate some of these items and issues. Is that the styles that we are looking at, of not styles, but the character of the neighborhoods that we are looking at, they're not well defined to the point that we can firmly understand when we say a building longer than 100 feet should be this high or that high, where that comes from, what that 100 feet means. Why should it be 120 or 150 feet? It's you don't have well-defined edges to it. So partially maybe because I'm not very familiar with the package yet. Maybe that's the problem for me at this point. But I'll be looking for that kind of a clarity to understand and let it be a sort of a basis for me to have in mind as I'm reading some of the issues as described here. I was present at a City of Pasadena presentation that was, the guidelines were presented by Moll and Polizoides, and they defined each style to a very high level of detail, where there were drawings to define that here's this style, this is the way windows are made, and everything, doors, openings, and all that. So to me, that was kind of very interesting because it gave you a very clear basis to evaluate everything else. So I'm going to be kind of looking for understanding what are the facts that exist in all these areas that can very simply define what the character is about one versus another. Then from there I can maybe say that maybe the south side and the north side are definitely different, hence we can make such and such decision. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we should understand the problem or the character of all these different areas and neighborhoods in a very clear and well-defined level of detail, and then be able to evaluate what we are kind of trying to assess one way or another.
Simone?
And it's, I think, ironic how some of the discussion that's started here has been focused in on Foothill Boulevard, because that was the first thing I thought of when I reviewed the document, specifically because we had a very hard time with a project that came in front of Design Review Board 1, which was the Toyota dealership. And the dealership wanted to expand, and they've been part of the community forever. And they had a very big expansion in mind, and a big part of the city's tax base and so forth is from the car dealerships. And so it certainly made a big impact, and they wanted to stay in the city, and they wanted to stay on Foothill, and they wanted to expand. And there was an amazing amount of opposition from the property owners, single-family property owners directly south of the dealership. And so I was really curious to read the report because that's what I focused in on immediately, and I was hoping we would be able to have some discussion there, and I'm really happy that we are having this discussion. In spirit of coming up with some alternatives, ideas, and thoughts and whatnot, there was something that I recommended at our hearing some time ago when the dealership project came in front of Board 1, and that is we want to promote commercial development. We want to promote good design on these commercial corridors, and at the same time we want the commercial owners to be successful, and we want that area to shop within its boundaries and not really have to drive to Burbank and Pasadena and so forth and keep the city dollars, the tax revenue within our city. That's the goal, that's the idea. And so we have these property owners to the south of it, and they're homeowners, and of course there's an elevation difference between Foothill and the streets to the south of it, and so when you end up with 50 feet, all of a sudden you end up with something pretty colossal blocking their views and their sunlight and so forth, and they have good idea, and they have good justification to come out and fight these projects. And the feeling that we got in Board 1 was no matter what we tried to do, whatever the ideas that we were presenting, it didn't make a difference. They just didn't want that expansion to occur. They didn't want that kind of a height. So whether we carved the building, pushed it back, and maneuvered it and massaged it, the general theme was that, God, this doesn't belong here. It's too big. An idea, something to consider, is to actually increase the zoning, the residential zoning, to maybe a multifamily zoning directly south of Foothill Boulevard. So in other words, there's a transition, commercial, whether it's R2250 or R1650 or whatever the number is, but some sort of a transition where you're making those property owners whole. And what I mean by whole, with the dollar sign whole. And in other words, their property values are increasing because the density on their properties are increasing. So now there's this collaboration. Well, okay, we get it. Commercial, directly south of it is multifamily. The zoning is changed. The density is changed. Perhaps that's a starting point because some of those very owners that were here objecting, I did some research and I looked into it, and some of them had bought their homes after the fact that the dealership was there. So they end up buying the least expensive home in the neighborhood, and that's because it's smack next to a dealership, and you hear the service corridor noise all day, and the tire guy is taking the tires off of the wheels, and there's that specific noise and so forth, and there's a reason those homes are being sold at a discount. And so now you have that home, and now you come to the hearings, and now it's up to us, design review board members, to try to solve this issue. It's a difficult one to solve because, frankly, at times it's very difficult to design a big project like that in 1 or 2 sessions. So as a thought, perhaps staff could look into raising the density of those properties which are adjacent to the southern half of the commercial property.
You know what will happen? The neighboring homes across the street will hate those big buildings.
Well, and that, so it's like a transition, right? So whether it's
Well, I
2250,
think what you're saying is there's a great example, and I don't know if staff has gone and looked at. I mean, I was just there yesterday, where the Trader Joe's is going, and the wall that they built along the property line. Now you have standing down on the street, looking up. It's probably, I want to say, about a 40-foot to the top of the wall is 40 feet, if not higher. So that's what you're going to get, and I agree. I think there needs to be some transition, or just city goes and buys all the properties and make it a park or something. I don't know.
Yeah, the other thing is that find out how we can really bring change to this whole area, because for the longest time all the neighbors, everyone who thinks that they're part of Foothill and they've been there for a long time, they don't like it to be any different. But if I remember that in one of our reviews, I brought up the example of Sunset Boulevard, which is kind of in the same kind of a terrain change and drops on the south side, and you find high-rises on the south side. You know, some of the hotels and bigger commercial developments are on the south side, and it's totally fine for that neighborhood to have that kind of development. I think at some point, some of us have to make the tough decision to allow some of this to happen, because otherwise it will never happen. If you make the transition, the neighbors across the street will say, we don't want this multifamily housing across from us. So they'll change our parking situation. We can't park on our street. You know, the kind of things that come about. But I think the key would be to make sure that good architecture is always part of what's going on there. Because if some of these developments have come up with great architecture, I think we could have supported it. The big reason that they didn't happen was that the architecture wasn't there. I would
kind of continuing on your thoughts, I think the biggest question for all of us is the compatibility. Everybody, it's the biggest word for everyone, and I think this guideline is kind of going towards that. But unfortunately, people that do accept the guidelines, they look at this as the Bible, and if we are giving them a specific size or height or any limitation, they look at that as this is it. This is what I can do. I'm going to build this, and I bet you anything, if they do follow this and they come back to Toyota, they're still going to have problems. So I think the challenge is to be very specific as defining compatibility rather than writing the book for it and letting people. I think we need to be that's the challenge, I think, and I think everybody looks for that. So I don't have an answer for it, but you know, and as Mr. Zarifian said, a lot of people expect, you know, they come in front of us, and if it's not a quality architecture, we're kind of hesitant to design it for them, but at the same time, we need to make sure that, you know, we have enough information there to give them the tools they need to create a better architecture. So, and limiting them, I don't know if it's the right answer.
Just to make sure that I wasn't misunderstood, I think Mr. Simonian's suggestion is a good one, though. I'm not saying that it's, but I think
I do agree.
It should be associated with good architecture and to be able to sustain its value.
Yeah, I think when we were, I guess we can, I was trying not to say the actual project, but when we were doing Foothill Lumber, I had asked for a street study, and I think the intent of what I was trying to ask for, that I think is ideal for you to do, is to make, even if it's not a real street, even just a picture of buildings you like, and try to make a collage that is as long as that stretch of Foothill, whatever that is, or 8th Mile or whatever it is. Try to do a collage of streets that you know that people could actually see. Because I'm telling you, if you did a 50-foot facade along a stretch of a mock-up, I doubt there'd be many people that would be supportive of it. I think it would be difficult to. And I think the reason I was asking for the street study, not because I was necessarily against it, was so that people really understood what that looked like. And I think it's important. You showed some great examples, but I think if you looked at those examples, they wouldn't be they wouldn't be the standards you're talking about. I have a feeling. Because I think a lot of the ones you're showing, and rightly so, I think they're very attractive, are sort of two-story facades that maybe have a plate line of 12 to 10 feet, 10 to 12 feet, something like that, in that kind of range. And then there maybe is, like the one you showed in La Jolla, there's a pitch roof that gave you the extra height, sort of like I was talking about. But I think this is an ideal opportunity, and I think a very important opportunity, because you're talking about re-envisioning that stretch of Foothill. And whatever the re-envisioning is that the county did, I mean, we either go along or not with that. But especially the south side of the street, you are re-envisioning what that part of the street is. And I think it's important for people to understand it, and they're not going to understand it by saying, even with the cross-section you did, or just saying 50 feet, it will not be understood. And I think it's very important that you do a mock-up, maybe sections of streets that people know or could visit or something, but there has to be a visual that is an explanation, a visual explanation of what you're proposing. Because and again, I'm not for or against it necessarily, but I don't think people understand what a 50-foot facade would be on that side of the street.
Yeah, we can definitely do more visual studies for what we mean by the zoning. It gives different alternatives.
Because it'll help you make the guidelines. To know that when you see a facade that you like, that there is variation in it, an amount of variation it is that's giving you, that's attractive to you. It'll help you get that standard. Or maybe there is a varying of heights. That how often is that varying to be supportive? I think it's a great way of doing it. So.
Okay.
On these boards for a long time, and good. I try to go back to the individual opportunity to achieve a good design, and it's a shame that sometimes they fail by doing that. When they don't listen or observe, as you're saying, like an opportunity to, what is good design? We don't want to be prescriptive, as Stephanie said when we first started, where it's a menu. Well, I did the menu because when a person goes that approach, their argument would be, well, I took the cornice from this one, and I took the header from this, and the doors from there, we put it all together. Doesn't it look terrific? Well, it doesn't look terrific. There is that individual talent and skill to achieve a good design. And so when people go down that route, and we try to show them where they missed the opportunities to do it well. I often go back to the beginning of a guidance, the beginning of a document, because the beginning sort of like gives you that overarching preamble of what it's supposed to do. And we have one here on 1.1, where when someone says, well, why did my project not get approved and it met the 50-foot height and below, you can always go back and say, well, it's a little esoteric to say what is compatibility. But we can say that, again, when you read it here, of high quality relates to the surrounding area. You can see, does that relate to the adjacent building, or as you're saying, Mike, to the people south of the neighbor? There's these things that I don't think you'll ever get it right or be able to 100% put it in writing. But the more visual cues, as you're suggesting, I think helps inform people. I see what you're saying. For example, Old Town Pasadena has a 2-story height, or at least it did. And there's some 3 stories in there now, newer ones and all that. But that's a good visual cue. It's got that banding. You can put a box, and Alan does, I think, successfully contemporary stuff, but there's this detailing and banding and stuff that makes it good. If I try to describe Alan's project just orally, people would think, oh, he's just designing boxes. Well, he doesn't. There's quality in there. There's good materials. He didn't do the prescriptive thing, well, I hit the 2-inch recess, so it must be good. No, this kind of structure needed 3 inches because it's the style. But I agree. Having as much information for people to review and examples of what is good design without mimicking, I think it would be a helpful tool in concert with the written word. And at the end of the day, it's about an environment that makes sense to its adjacencies. I do have a question, though. Currently on the south side, let's say, for example, there's a 50-foot height limit, correct? Has there been discussions that, for example, if I was a property owner, commercial building property owner, and I bought my property yesterday with the intent of developing it well, but I know that my 50-foot height limit is allowable, and I'm going to design something really good. And if you reduce that, have you now potentially and adversely harmed my project and the profitability of it and its value and all that? Has any thinking been done on that with our, let's say, our city attorney and stuff? That's my question.
The legal question is kind of when something becomes a government taking. And courts have generally viewed that as when you reduce something to having almost no economic viability at all. A more moderate step, like reducing a height limit from 3 stories to 2 stories, would not be seen by a court as being any kind of unconstitutional taking of property rights.
Well, in addition to that, we did, when we went to council initially with the proposal for the general plan, we also asked for funding to do an economic study as to what would occur, what would that mean to those properties, and we didn't get the funding to do that, so we don't have the economic study,
So
I'm afraid.
to repeat it in my simple terms, if I own a property, commercial, and I currently have it at 50 feet, and then in the future, the maximum height is reduced to 30 feet, let's say 35 feet, whatever it is, that's okay, that's, we're allowed to do that. Because my vision was...
Better build it now. That's what.
Pardon?
Build it now.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a reduction of density. That happens, and it happens all the time. But it's an important thought because value of these commercial properties can be adverse, and that could demote the vibrancy of what we're trying to achieve by guidelines and architecture and quality. You now have potentially demoted the value of a commercial area and thus reduce the vibrancy of businesses and stuff in there,
I'm assuming your question is largely rhetorical.
It is, yeah, it's rhetorical now.
Yeah, but we have discussed that with the community there, that, if the height limit is too restrictive, you'll never get anything new. That generally speaking, no one tears down a 1-story building just to build another 1-story building. It might happen, but it's pretty rare. Yeah, so, I mean, how things look design-wise is obviously a very important component. But, I mean, as you're suggesting, we also have to take into consideration all other sorts of factors.
Well, you do have the option of giving some incentive for people to do lower, and then if similar to affordable housing, if you do affordable, you get percentage of increase or something. Maybe that's the answer, to encourage people to reduce the height, and in return they will get certain, I don't know, maybe. Okay, well, any more questions? Okay, then yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I mean, if I may, just to, I guess mostly for the members of the public, because I assume that you're all sophisticated enough to know this, but one of the biggest points of discussion we've had tonight is how prescriptive these guidelines should be. And obviously not only do we have a great variety of buildings in the built environment, especially along Foothill, but even the terrain there varies considerably block to block, and how much it drops off or doesn't drop off. These guidelines are just that. They are guidelines. If someone wanted to vary from them, they would not need to go through a variance process and make those difficult variance findings. I mean, they're written so that you as a board would have discretion into how to interpret them. So I guess if you are continuing to consider the question of how prescriptive they should be, we're going to need to also consider, what uniformity there may or may not exist along sites in which for which we might be able to make more prescriptive guidelines, if that's where you choose to head.
Yeah, I think that is really one of the most important frames in which we'll ask you to review the document. If and when these are adopted, we'll hope that something is adopted in the fall. How would it be to implement them? What would it be to say, like, look at a project, as Board Member Insua was mentioning, but I complied with all of these guidelines, so there should be nothing wrong with my project. So if you could look at the comprehensive design guideline document, that is a guideline and could be more prescriptive or less prescriptive, but it will still be a guideline. The guidelines that are within the community plan, however, once adopted, will have the force of a general plan. So they have legally, they have more weight. So what we tried to do is to make sure that we never use the term shall, especially within the community plan, so that even if something said, as the example that Chair Malekian mentioned, should be 1 or 2 inches, if that's too prescriptive, let's make a note of it and we'll strike it. If it could be more prescriptive in areas of the comprehensive design guidelines, because that is a design guideline document and has less legal authority, if you will, then those are some of the subtleties that we can work with to get a document that's really very usable as we go forward on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. I think we had all our questions. If there's any more, should we adjourn?
I just want to repeat for everyone here that we have another joint DRB meeting on July 28th, and I believe the calendar right now is free of other items, so that we will start our joint meeting at 5 o'clock, and we're hoping that all of you that can't be here, if any of you can't be here, you'll provide something to us in writing so that we could provide that to the rest of the board members.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do we need to make a motion, or?
I make a motion, we adjourn.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you.